Thank you very much, Graham, and I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. I don't know how many of you were at this event last year, but when I spoke there, I described some of the challenges ahead and some of the uncertainties ahead and the tough times ahead and the agenda of procurement reform that the then Scottish Government was embarking upon, and how that was designed to help us give some clarity as we navigate through the difficult and choppy waters. Well, those waters have certainly proved difficult and choppy, as Graham has talked about. And on the face of it, there has never really been a worse time to sell to the public sector. Spending's being cut, there's less work to go around, government's under increasing pressure to get more for its money, margins are being squeezed, it's all about the bottom line, and European laws and regulations mean that small businesses are competing against the great big multinationals, and all governments and public sector purchasers are interested in is buying big, buying cheap. So you may as well give up now. Now that's a depressingly familiar theme that I hear all too often, but you won't be surprised to learn that it's an analysis that I reject completely and I reject absolutely. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you've never had it so good. But what I am going to say and what I am going to tell you is that I am confident that as a result of the public procurement reform programme carried out over the past two political administrations in Scotland, as a result of procurement reform in Scotland, businesses, and small businesses in particular, have never had better access to public contracts than they have today. Now, of course, lots more needs to be done. Some of the conversations I've had in the margins of this morning have really brought that into quite sharp focus. More needs to be done, and that's reflected in each of the main parties' manifestos for the Scottish Parliament elections. All of those manifestos explicitly recognise the importance of public procurement and the importance of ease of access to small and medium enterprises for public works. This Thursday marks 2 weeks to polling day, and I've been reading the party manifestos with great interest. As a civil servant, politically neutral, I have to be prepared for whatever party or combination of parties may come into power, and I have to work with new ministers to help turn their manifesto pledges into programmes of actions that are legal, affordable, and deliver the outcomes that they've set. But one of the great strengths of procurement reform in Scotland is the wide cross-party support that it has received. The John McClelland report that kicked off the whole reform programme was commissioned and endorsed by the previous Labour Liberal Democrat coalition, and the implementation was taken forward under the previous SNP government. Procurement is one of those rare public policy subjects on which there is a wide degree of political consensus. So although there are naturally some differences of opinion about the way forward, I am pleased, touch wood, that this support looks set to continue. Now, the future is always going to be interesting, but as well as looking into the future, as a historian, I also like to look back and try to understand some of the lessons of history. And one of my passions is the history of the classical world. My first degree was in ancient history. So, as well as Thursday marking 2 weeks to the Scottish election, this Thursday is also the anniversary, how many of you know this, the anniversary of the date in 753 BC, when legend has it that Romulus founded the city of Rome. Now, the Romans, in so many respects, were years, generations, centuries ahead of their time, and public procurement is no exception. The historian Livy, writing about the grain crises in 200 BC, said, "The Senate farmed the taxes to the highest bidders and let out the contracts to the lowest tenders." And 150 years later, Marcus Tullius Cicero, one of my historical heroes, in a speech to the Senate, recounted how the censors could grant tax collection contracts only in front of the Roman people. And so the letting of those contracts, the auctions for them, took place in the Forum Romanum, the forerunner perhaps of today's transparency agenda. And those merchants who were successful in being awarded public contracts were offered a standard set of terms and conditions set out in the Leges Locationem, something which, 2,000 years later, we still haven't managed to agree across the public sector in Scotland. But I like to think that if we ever do, when I go to the underworld and meet Cicero, he'll be pleased with me. It wasn't all rosy, though. Livy also tells us about post-contract negotiations and how they're nothing new. The Senate, yielding to the prayers and lamentations of the tax farmers, annulled the contracts and ordered fresh terms to be made. And the censors gave public notice that those who treated the former contracts with such contempt should not be allowed to make fresh bids. They signed fresh contracts for everything on slightly easier terms. Well, again, there are echoes of that. But for all their sophistication, all their strength, and all their fancy ideas about public procurement, the Romans, as anyone who's recently seen the film The Eagle will recently know, the Romans never succeeded in conquering Scotland. And perhaps that's because they tried to take Scotland by force. And Scotland to this day doesn't really take kindly to force. And that recognition is one of the reasons why the public procurement reform programme has always adopted an approach based on collaboration between the different buying organisations in the public sector, and cooperation with the private sector and with the third sectors. And that, as I've said, is an approach which has had a great deal of success over 2 administrations. One of the main motivating factors for any government is going to be to reduce its cost base. And we've done so. Over the first 4 years of the procurement reform, savings of over 800 million have been reported across the public sector in Scotland. And in the current environment, further savings will need to be found. And that will mean taking some tough decisions. But categorically, what it does not mean is closing the door to Scotland's small businesses and Scotland's medium-sized businesses. In fact, quite the opposite. Because your interests are at the very heart of what we're doing. I was talking to someone who runs an international mobile phone business the other day, and he said, well, the beauty of the private sector is the clarity of focus. He said, what I'm interested in isn't selling mobile phones, I'm interested in increasing shareholder value, and everything else can go hang. Now, for me, the joy of public procurement is that it's not just as simple as that. And this value for money triangle is one way of illustrating how value in procurement isn't just about the bottom line, it's about an informed balance. It's an informed balance of quality, it's an informed balance of cost, and it's an informed balance of sustainability. And within all that, improving ease of access to small and medium enterprises for public sector contracts is absolutely fundamental.